Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Watershed Steward series of 2021. Today's class is Medicinal Plants of the Middle Rio Grande Valley with Dara Saville. We're so excited to have her join us. But first, I'd like to introduce the Watershed Stewards program. As you see on the picture here, we have an arroyo in Rio Rancho, and that is because we are acknowledging our funders for this program, the SCAFCA, which is the Southern Sandoval County Arroyo Flood Control Authority. SCAFCA's mission is to protect citizens and property by implementing proven flood control solutions. So you may not know your local flood control authority. SCAFCA works primarily in Southern Sandoval County to protect residences, educate people, and not just about the concerns of flood control, but the importance of the habitat in arroyos and how preserving and protecting that habitat is really good for all of us, including the residents that live there. This program is also managed by Ciudad Soil and Water Conservation District. My name is Erin Blaze, and I am the education coordinator for Ciudad. Our mission is to educate about and assist with the implementation of resource conservation practices that preserve soil and water. And I'd like to share with you that we have an upcoming new program that is a webinar series that runs June 14th through the 16th in the evenings, 5:30 to 7 p.m. And this series is about rainwater harvesting. Many of us, love a beautiful landscape, and figuring out how to support a thriving pollinator garden or native plant habitat works really well in tandem with rainwater harvesting, so capturing rainwater that lands on our properties. But this also is a community effort to help protect the Rio Grande from stormwater. Stormwater is any water that runs across our city and can enter the river system without being cleaned. Stormwater can often have pollutants in it. So by capturing and slowing down the flow of stormwater into our river while also feeding our beautiful landscapes can benefit us all. And to learn more about this program, you can check out our Facebook page. Ciudad's Facebook page will have event information, or please go ahead and contact me at ciudadeducation@gmail.com. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Dara Saville. Dara Saville is an herbalist, geographer, author, mother, gardener, and native plant advocate in Albuquerque. She is the founder and an instructor at the Albuquerque Herbalism Bioregional Herbal Studies Program, and the executive director of the Yerba Mansa Project, a nonprofit organization. Dara is also the author of the University of New Mexico Press book, The Ecology of Herbal Medicine, a guide to plants and living landscapes of the American Southwest. We are so excited to have Dara join us today. She has a wealth of information to give us about local plants, native plants in our area, and their medicinal uses and cultural uses. So without further ado, here is Dara. Thank you so much.
Native medicinal plants, and also we do free programs for school classrooms and for the whole community. So it's really fun work that I get to do. I get to meet all the best people of our community, and I'm just happy to be able to share all of this with you all this morning. So with that, I will also say I love when people have questions or valuable, relevant information or stories to add. So as we go through this talk, I'm going to leave the chat window open. And if you want to add anything to the chat, please do. And then at the end, if anyone wants to unmute and join the conversation, ask questions or whatever, then I would welcome that also. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right into the plants that I picked to talk about. And I will say it's always hard to narrow it down to just a few plants for any particular habitat type or ecosystem type that I'm I'm focusing on. This is just a short selection. There could be many other incredible plants that we could be talking about here today. But I'm going to start off with one of my favorites, which is the cottonwood. This is a plant that's familiar to everyone who lives in this valley and lives along any Western waterway for that matter. And it's a plant that's near and dear to my heart, one that has really shaped my life in a personal way and helped me to realize, like many other plants have, that a lot of the healing and medicinal properties of plants are things that can never be put in a bottle or a jar. That a lot of the healing that comes from botanical medicine really is derived from our connectivity with the natural world at large and our relationship with individuals within that living system that we're a part of. And cottonwoods, for me, have always been a matriarchal being of our river valley culture and our biological inheritance. And they really stand at the heart of our valley ecosystem and our culture. So I think it's a good place to start. And even though cottonwoods aren't really dryland plants per se, they can inhabit drylands by having a water table that is reachable below the surface. You may know a little bit about cottonwoods already. In case you don't, I will just say that they do need to be able to reach the water table to grow. So they are indicators of water in the desert. And also cottonwoods, really are one of these kind of harbingers of change that we're seeing here. They are a reflection of our relationship with land and water. The health of the cottonwoods really reflects that. And so we see that they are senescing now. And for me, it's always this reminder about our importance of respectful relationship with water. And so for me, there are many, many lessons that plants can bring to us to make us better people, better stewards of our land and water. And cottonwood is always offering us that invitation to do better, and no matter what we're doing, we can always do better. And cottonwoods having this sort of matriarchal, motherly kind of role in the ecosystem. They provide the structure of the forest. They provide shade, critical shade. They provide critical leaf litter, mulch. They provide habitat for all kinds of creatures, from porcupines and understory beings, and a whole bunch of life forms really rely on what the cottonwoods provide as ecosystem structure and functioning. And so when we think about this critical role that they play in the biological world, it extends into our cultural reality as well. The cottonwoods providing all of those things to other life forms are things that we also need. So cottonwoods create the invitation for us to settle along waterways and to build our cultures along waterways, which is what humans do around the world. And cottonwoods have provided materials for making all kinds of objects, useful objects. They provide food and medicine. And, they are at the center of many of the stories that we tell about ourselves as valley dwelling New Mexicans. And so I just have a lot of love and gratitude and appreciation for all that cottonwoods provide universally. And I will say, I just feel, if I think of any one plant that defines us in the Central Valley here of New Mexico, it's cottonwoods. And so as a food, people have harvested those catkins, those flowers that you've seen recently in the last few weeks. They've been popping out of their buds. Those actually are nutritious wild edible that you can eat. You can stir fry them and saute them with other vegetables. There are a lot of historical recipes of people working with those and making different things, like mixing them with resins to make chewing gum and all kinds of fascinating things. And additionally, as a medicinal plant, this is one that I just couldn't really do without. I feel, as a human being living in this physical body, at some point, each one of us is doomed to have bodily aches and pains. We work hard in our gardens, in our physical lives. We get older, we use our joints and muscles. Bodies get sore for one reason or another. And it's just part of taking care of our physical selves. And cottonwoods are one of the great herbs, in my view, for helping to alleviate bodily aches and pains. This plant, and I'm talking about these resinous buds that you see here in this top picture, and you can see some of the resin right on there. And these were harvestable a few weeks ago. I usually pick these in early March, right at the very end of winter. And so the time for harvesting this is just past, but it comes around again every year. For me, it's one of my most important benchmarks on my annual calendar. It brings me out of winter and into spring, and this whole new mindset of seasonal change is marked for me by cottonwood buds. I like to gather these, and we want to extract that resin. That resin is where so much of the good stuff is. You can extract that resin into an oil of your choosing, like olive oil or grapeseed oil or avocado oil. Those are some of my favorites, but there's others you could use too. And that resin, with a little bit of heat applied, and I've written about this on my blog at albuquerqueherbalism.com. If you want to know more about how to make it, you can read about it there on your own time. But a little bit of warmth extracts that resin into oil, and you can make this kind of slightly tacky resinous body oil that you can use as massage oil. And when someone rubs that into you, that resinous extraction creates a little bit of resistance and just sort of gently warms and softens the body and the muscles, and all of that physical tension and stress that you're holding in your physical body just kind of melts away. It's so fabulous. And for me, the concept of rubbing these plants that I love all over, is just this. It's another step forward in my union and my love with these plants, and you feel really good afterwards. And cottonwood, being part of the willow family, is very high in a substance called salicin, which is anti-inflammatory and pain relieving, and so. It's stuff pharmacists have extracted to make those over-the-counter pain relievers that you buy, including aspirin, but it's present in high quantities in many plants of the willow family, including our coyote willows and here the cottonwoods. And so these buds, for me, as a topical remedy, are one of my mainstays, one of my favorite things. You can also infuse the buds into a combination of alcohol and water, which is what herbalists call a tincture. And we don't have time to go into the details of all that today, but many plants have medicinal compounds that extract well into water or into alcohol. And a tincture will capture both of those into one thing. So it makes a really nice, convenient remedy. Not everyone's willing to drink cups of tea, or people are busy living their lives, and a tincture is something convenient that you can carry around with you and just take drops or squirts of it during the day as needed. So cottonwood buds also extracted in tincture. Some of the alcohol constituents make a really nice expectorating herb, which means to help with productive coughing. They can help to loosen phlegm and mucus and get that out if you have that in your respiratory system. In addition, that salicin that I talked about, being anti-inflammatory and pain relieving, also has fever reducing qualities. So it's really useful to have on hand for a variety of different kinds of conditions. I think there's a lot more we could say about cottonwoods, but I'm going to move on because I have a selection of plants that I really want to share with you. I don't want to spend all day on any one of these plants, but anyhow, Eve says, I never knew cottonwoods enough. Willow bark I'd heard of. Yes, well, cottonwood and willow actually are very, closely related plants. We may not think of them that way because they look so different to us, but they are in the same plant family. Here's another one that I really like to talk about because I feel like it's kind of poorly understood and not really adequately appreciated. This is snakeweed. Snakeweed oftentimes is described as an invasive plant. I know a lot of people, especially who work in ecology and restoration and land management, don't like this plant, and I can understand why. But we sometimes give plants names or assign words, descriptive words to them, like invasive, when we just don't like them. But really, I think it's in this case, a scapegoating term, because, snakeweed is a native plant. We don't oftentimes refer to it as a native plant. We just call it an invasive plant, but it is native. It belongs here. It's always been with us in this area. And we call it an invasive plant. It's because it's a reflection of us thinking about the land as an economic commodity. We don't think of it as a living system when we're using terms like that. And if we did, we might use different kinds of terminology that don't have this negative connotation. Snakeweed has always been present in smaller densities in our landscape, and through our land use decisions, most especially grazing, this plant has become invasive in character because, as you can see from this picture, it loves to germinate on areas of bare soil, which are created by grazing practices that aren't sustainable in the way they're operating. And then once it gets established in large densities, it can perpetuate ecological changes that favor its own spread through the land. Snakeweed has allelopathic chemicals in its roots, which means that it releases some compounds into the soil that other plants don't want to be anywhere near. So it deters other plants from growing close to it so that it can create a low root density area for itself to gather more resources. And so in that way, it's just a highly intelligent plant that's taking advantage of opportunities that we've created for it. And so I just like to put this little reframe on some of the language we use about plants so we can think a little bit more about how we're talking about plants and how that might be really a reflection of our relationship with the land. Plants are always telling us that story about our relationship with land and water. What plants we see around us really is part of that story, because the plant communities are a reflection of our interaction with the rest of the world. And so Emily asks, is this Escoba de la Vibra? Yes, that's another name for this plant. So it's the same thing we're talking about. So that's a little bit about the ecology and our relationship with this plant. The main picture you see is how this plant looks at this time of year and during the summer. And then late summer, it gets covered with these really beautiful golden blossoms that you see in the lower part of the picture. So it has a different appearance as the growing season progresses. And as an herbalist, I like to gather this plant because, as I said, it's widespread. Its range and population density is increasing. This is a plant that has a wide range across most of the western states and plain states, and likes dry, disturbed habitat conditions, which we have plenty of in the western states. So snakeweed is a great plant to talk about for wild harvesting because its populations are stable and expanding. So we don't have to worry too much about the sensitivity of this plant and harvesting pressures. And it's a really kind of a legendary plant in modern herbal medicine in the Southwest. When we look back at the archaeological record or early botanical, ethnobotanical information, we don't have a lot of records or reasons to believe this was a really popular, widely used medicine in the past, hundreds of years ago. But as I said, that might have a lot to do with the fact that this was once a much less dense plant in the landscape. And only in the last 100 to 150 years or so has this really taken off and spread. So now it's actually a highly revered plant in many of our Southwestern herbal traditions, especially Hispanic herbal traditions, place high value on this, and for good reason. The plant is slightly resinous and very aromatic. It's very dispersive, very decongesting. So, in herbalist language, we're talking really about creating movement in the body, helping to unstick stagnancy. And, a classic example of that would be in the respiratory system when you're congested. We all know what that feels like. And then, a plant like snakeweed can help loosen that congestion and decongest the respiratory system and get things moving again. So you can cough things up, so you can blow things out your nose, so you can start your healing process and really propel that forward. And snakeweed is great for that. People will make tea out of it and drink small amounts of it. It's not one that, I would encourage people to just, have gallons of this. It's one that's used, you drink a couple of ounces at a time, a few times a day, and it helps to get the systems moving again. Stagnancy can be presented in the body in other forms. This is actually a famous arthritis remedy. That's physical stagnancy in the body. And, it's a form of just kind of congestion of the physical musculature. And so this is something that people will make a concentrated tea out of, and they'll pour it in their bath water and soak in it. So that gets the physical body unstuck and decongested and moving again, alleviating that arthritic pain. Would be a great companion for Cottonwood. What a treatment to take a bath and soak in this, and then get, a rub down with some Cottonwood bud oil. That sounds like a heavenly treatment for a sore body. And these are the things that our environment is offering us, and our relationship with the land can teach us about and can deepen that healing process. When you know these plants and love them, soaking in them and rubbing them on yourself has this whole new dimension to it, because you are also thinking about your relationship with these plants. And, when we think about our relationship with people, that can be very healing. Going out to tea with some friend on a bad day makes sense to all of us. Of course, we know that makes us feel better, but we have that offered to us through many avenues in the natural world as well. Our relationship and this mutual caring for the land and plants, and those lands and plants and water caring for us. When we acknowledge that reciprocal giving and caretaking of each other, all the elements of the web of life, there's just this whole new element to interacting with herbs as medicine. And so I like to take it to that deeper level, because really just walking in the land and through the landscape is medicinal. We can leave loving gratitude and intentions that will resonate through the landscape. We can engage in active restoration work and caretaking work. We can advocate for better sustainable land and water policies as our gift. And then we can receive these other gifts and feel like it's mutually beneficial. So snakeweed, many gifts coming from this plant, and maybe we can start thinking about it more as a native plant and less of the kind of derogatory weedy type language that we sometimes give to it. Moving right along, here is prickly pear. This is a plant, again, that I think most people know. This is pretty amazing. We associate this so much with Southwestern culture, which is completely appropriate. But the cool thing about Opuntia species, and there are many prickly pears, is that they're highly adaptive to actually a wide range of habitat conditions. It's pretty incredible to think that there are Opuntia species across the entire Americas, ranging almost all the way up to the Arctic Circle and almost all the way down to the southern tip of Patagonia. When you think about this concept of plant intelligence, which some people raise their eyebrows about, I'm thinking, hey, this is so obvious. These plants, Opuntia is a great example of learning how to adapt to incredibly wide-ranging conditions by changing its physical form and structure in ways that reflect the environment in which it lives. So, the idea that only we respond to our environment is so silly. That plants are doing that as well, and they're using their own kind of intelligence to survive and thrive in the conditions that they are offered and find themselves in. So these are a few of the Opuntias that you'll see commonly in central New Mexico. I know a lot of people just, and it makes perfect sense to really look at flowers to try to identify species. But in the case of cacti, and especially prickly pears, that can be deceiving. The picture in the lower left just shows you one individual cactus plant, which is Opuntia polyacantha, has two different flowers, two different flower colors on one plant. So that's not the best way to identify prickly pears. Instead, I encourage people to start looking at spines. Part of the fun of herbalism is really learning how to look at the natural world and pay attention to details, things we might not even notice, but are really amazing when we get down and look at it. Here you can notice the polyacantha over here, and here's another one just to show you the variation in this one species with the flower colors. But the polyacantha has these long white spines that are really densely arranged on the pads, whereas Opuntia phaeacantha, which you see here, has much less dense spines, and they're usually brown, like you see here. But oftentimes these species grow together, and they have a propensity for cross hybridizing. And you can see that here with some white spines, the influence of this polyacantha, and some brown spines, which you would expect from this phaeacantha species. So really fun, like botany nerd out opportunities within herbalism and land stewardship. Of course, these fruits that you see here are wonderful to harvest. They make a fantastic juice, not as hard to make as you would think. And I actually, depending on the size of the fruit, get about 1 ounce of juice out of each one. So they're very juicy, and you get a high yield for your efforts. And the juice is fantastic. If you've ever wanted to make the most beautiful princess pink cake icing, then this is your way to do that. And also just drinking the juice is delicious. I like to mix it with like lemon balm tea and some of my other favorite teas. Sometimes I just water it down with some water because it tastes really good on its own. I freeze this so that I have small jars that I can take out continuously through the year. And it's not only delicious, but it really helps to regulate the body in important ways. As we have a real steep rise in lifestyle-related health problems, things like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high blood sugar. Prickly pear has had a burst of scientific research in the last few decades as these problems have risen. And prickly pear is a great contributing remedy for rebalancing these kinds of imbalances. Prickly pear is fantastic for regulating blood sugar and helping to improve cholesterol ratios. So these are things that people really struggle with and are widespread problems in our population, which can then lead to other cascading health issues. And if we can use natural remedies like prickly pear to help rebalance these problems when they're still in this mild to moderate level, then we can create a beneficial health cascade for people. We also can empower people to take charge of their basic health care and their basic health. I know many people who have managed these kinds of lifestyle health problems with prickly pear and some reasonable adjustments to their diet. So herbs aren't magic remedies. We need to do other things in tandem with herbal protocols, but many herbs can be very good at rebalancing systems that get pulled out of whack by whatever, microbial infections, poor diet, or whatever it might be that has caused the imbalance to start with. These herbs can help to recalibrate and create this beneficial health cascade. When we have balanced blood sugar, balanced cholesterol, we feel better systemically. You know, it's important to remember that our bodies are ecosystems all their own. And when we can rebalance one aspect of it, it has a beneficial chain reaction. Likewise, when we allow something to get too far out of balance, that can have a negative chain reaction. So plants, are really always giving us this message of balance in the environment, whether we're talking about land use and using land and water as we need to survive, but doing it in a balanced and respectful way that also allows the land to retain its resiliency and taking what we need at the same time, but protecting the land's ability to rebalance itself. We approach herbal medicine and healing the same way, and asking herbs, using herbs in ways that help to rebalance our systems in positive ways. So that's a little bit about prickly pear. The pads are also edible and can help with these issues as well. They can actually help to slow down. If you eat the pads as food, they can actually help to slow down your digestion of sugars and can help your blood sugar and cholesterol in that way as well. Moving on to juniper, which is one of my favorite plants. Like, I could literally talk about juniper all day long. We could have like a whole class just on this. I just absolutely adore juniper. It's one of the plants that's so widespread, another one that's just everywhere. In fact, in some habitats, we could consider this an encroaching, expanding plant. There are some habitats where people are actually trying to get rid of this. And so it's another one that I like to talk about harvesting from the wild, because these populations are stable and in some places expanding. And it's a plant that I really associate moving forward with us into this future climate change era. Junipers are very hardy, very resilient, very enduring and reliable characters in the landscape. They are very drought tolerant. They can withstand several years of drought because they can store a lot of carbon, more than a lot of other species. They can store a lot of their own sugars. And so they are able to kind of close themselves up and prevent water loss, to protect themselves in really prolonged dry times. And they don't need to photosynthesize as frequently as other plants do, because they're able to store so many of their own food resources for themselves that they can go a long time keeping their stomata closed and not trans-evaporating their water. And so they are very resilient, hardy, drought-tolerant plants. And another one that I just really associate with our local landscapes that really defines our culture. If you look up juniper species, and there are many, and many species around the world. So this is like a global culture that we share through this plant, a plant that really kind of unites humanity in its relationship with this species, which I think is so cool, because wherever we might have our ancestral lineages in the world, there's a good chance juniper can connect us to those ancestral traditions around the world. And so I love plants for that way too. But here in the Southwest, this is a plant we can rely on in the future and creates critical habitat. There are many animal species that rely on junipers for cover and for forage. Many animals browse these leaves and eat these berries, and lots of birds and small mammals make their homes in this environment. There are also I think it's like a dozen or 15 individual plant species, which are only associated with pinon juniper type plant communities. So they create a habitat that facilitates the life of many others. And so they're very important ecologically. And as a medicine, I could say so much about this. We'll only be able to kind of touch the tip of the value and gifts of this plant. But if you look in any ethnobotanical book that describes traditional longstanding uses and knowledge of this plant, it's absolutely legion. It'll be the most number of pages of any species in the book. I'd almost guarantee it. Yarrow might be the only close contender. But the leaves are really amazing. They make an incredible infused oil, again, for relaxing the physical body. This is one of the few plants I know that is really, truly muscle relaxant, opening up through the relaxation of the body, opening up blockages and resistance, increasing blood flow, increasing our mental and creative capacities, removing blockages from that, just creating a lot of energetic systemic movement. And juniper has a lot of kind of magical associations, which if we're scientific minded, we might kind of poo-poo that. But in reality, this is a plant that provides a feeling of protection and safety and comfort for people, while also allowing people to do that kind of decongesting and expanding that we talked about. And so it has a long-standing history of use in things like childbirth and death rituals, kind of relaxing people and making them feel safe to undergo a major transition, whether that's birthing or dying, while also feeling safe to be very vulnerable in those times and protected. So, relaxing and feeling safe and in your vulnerability is an incredible gift that this plant provides. And throughout the pandemic, I've been telling people, think about juniper. A lot of people have been spending a lot of time alone with their thoughts and feelings. And for a lot of people, stress and traumatic memories and experiences are coming back. And we're just sitting here with them and having difficulty sorting through it and processing it. And juniper is a great plant for helping people to work through things like that. And just going back to the physical body, it's so nice to have these herbs that relax our muscular stress and tension, where we're storing all of our anxiety and stress from our lives. It helps to relax and soften that so we can release it and let it go. Also, on a more practical level, there's, a lot of just kind of concrete uses of juniper. Juniper as a tincture internally is very, very strong, and I use just very tiny amounts of it, but it's incredibly decongesting. If you have a lot of respiratory constriction or congestion, a really gnarly respiratory infection, this will just open everything up for a few hours. And you can keep taking it and kind of reopening and re-decongesting yourself. Also, these berries, I'd like to speak just specifically about them for a moment. They're, of course, used in gin making. So if you like fun spirits, there's that. You can also make delicious syrups out of this for making your own different kinds of beverages, whether those are cocktails or kombucha or whatever. And the berries are also a carminative, which is means that it helps to break up gas and bloating when you have symptoms of indigestion. And they're also a urinary antiseptic. So they're used in treating urinary tract infections and things like that. So, just juniper is one of those things I could never do without. That juniper infused oil must be one of my top favorite personal remedies. The aromatic smell of it is just so transformative for me. As soon as I smell that oil, I am in this incredible landscape that you see right here. And that is medicine for me. I could just wear it as a botanical perfume and float through my day with happiness. If there's an aroma that you really like, it can really transform your emotional state and your whole outlook. And I find this plant to be very transformative. So I'm going to check in here on the chat and see what's happening here. There's some stuff popping up that I missed. And Lorraine says, going back to the prickly pear, She says she's used to finding the purple flesh tunas, but in Mexico, there were green ones that were also sweet. The differences between them, I can't really comment on that because I'm not too familiar with the green fruited species. So I don't know about those. If I saw something like that, I would think maybe they weren't ripe because I'm used to seeing reddish to purple colored ones as well. So I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer for that. Yeah, and then Aaron adds the juniper allergies. Yes, yes. And so I will say, I'm glad you brought that up. Don't harvest juniper during the pollen season. Wait until that passes. This is harvestable. The greenery is harvestable all summer long. And then, of course, the berries are going to be a more late season harvest anyway. So definitely don't harvest during pollen season. Wait until afterwards. Yeah. And then, biting gnats. Geez, I hadn't experienced that. But yeah, that stinks. So yeah, just avoid the pollen. And then Jim says prickly pear syrup is very popular for cocktails too. Yes. I love making herbal syrups, and herbal infused oils are probably two of my favorite things. So you might notice that I talk about them a lot, but, I think during the pandemic, I've gotten very creative in my kitchen, like a lot of people, and I made a lot of herbal syrups this year, and I've been using them to like make wild lemonades and flavor kombucha and have some cocktails on my back porch and stuff like that. So it's been really fun and tasty and delicious, and also just kind of brings me back into connection to the landscapes where I harvested these things. The tastes and the aromas just transport me to my happy places, and my love of land and plants just bursts forth with every sip. And so there's this medicinal association, that comes up for me. And then Emily says, is the oil is with the leaves or the berries? So with juniper, I use the leaves to make the infused oil. They're very aromatic. And I just chop them up and dry them out for about 24 hours. And then I infuse them into whatever kind of oil it is I like. With juniper, it's so aromatic. I try to choose a non-aromatic oil. Like I wouldn't use coconut oil, for example, for this. But there's many oils you could pick depending on what it is. I'm sorry, hang on one second. All right. Some stuff going on outside my window. My schnauzer doesn't like that. Anyhow, let's get back to this. And so juniper infused oil would be great for eczema and psoriasis. Absolutely. It's great for chronic inflammatory skin conditions. So those would be excellent uses of it for sure. Let's see. And then there's a question about a transcript or access of recording. I'll refer that to Erin. And she can maybe answer that at the end. And then Yasmin says she made a shrub last summer with juniper berry, lavender, and tart small apple. Wow, that sounds amazing. I think I would like that recipe. That sounds like something I would like to try in small amounts. Like my cocktail glasses are like super tiny. That way I can have two. Anyhow, that's a lot about juniper. I have some more plants in this slideshow, so I'm going to move right along to Apache plume, which is something you'll commonly see in arroyos, whether they're dry or they're running. Apache plume really likes to live in places that are generally dry, but it could get down to the water table. And this is a rose family member. So if you know things about herbs already, the things you know about the rose family are going to apply here. I really particularly love the dryland roses. They really just capture my heart. These incredible plumes that many of them produce, are just such beautiful structures. They're like living art forms that entrance me every time. And of course, the tiny white roses that this plant produces are just gorgeous. So roses are cooling. and drying. And so in herbalist language, we're talking about, in the case of hair and skin products, which rose family plants have commonly been used, oily skin, helping to rebalance skin that's overly oily by drying it out a little bit, or skin that has hot inflammations on it, like rashes, or maybe you've seen people who just don't have anything overt going on, but they always have kind of a reddish cast to their skin a little bit. That's an indication of a lot of heat, and perhaps chronic inflammation of some sort. And roses can really help to cool that down in the skin. Likewise, internally, you can use roses, including Apache plume, when you have heat and wetness in the respiratory system. If you have a very wet respiratory condition, you can use roses in there. Also, they're kind of a classic remedy for the digestive system. If you think about, having diarrhea, for example, your small intestine's not wringing out all that water and reallocating it properly, so the body can reuse it. You know what the symptom is like. Roses can kind of cool and dry that and alleviate those symptoms. So the best, is really the unopened buds of the flowers. If you can get them right before they open, that would be ideal. Or flowers that have just opened would be the second best thing. So that's a little bit about how I use roses. I work with many rose species, including cultivated classic roses or wild roses, the Rosa woodsii, which is common in our area. I also really like that as well. Here's the desert willow. The willow is a complete misnomer. This is not a willow family member. It's actually a catalpa family member. So we do have a lot of common names that really aren't appropriate and are misleading. It's called willow because it has these long, narrow leaves like many willow species do. But so just to clarify that it doesn't have those same medicinal properties that you might think based on its common name. But this is a great herb for antifungal preparations. If somebody has something like athlete's foot, or even a staph infection, which isn't fungal, but you could make a sitz bath for, say, like a vaginal infection. So that's like a soak, this, and you can use it internally also for systemic fungal infections. You can make a tea out of it. I've mostly made tea for topical soaking and for drinking, and I like to include this in my antifungal formulas. It's a common plant, another one that shares a similar habitat to Apache plume, really liking arroyo environments. And also it's just a very common landscaping plant around town. So you'll see it in urban and wild environments alike. And I gather pods, leaves, and flowers for tea making, and I use it like that. Moving along here to sage. This is another plant where we could talk about for a long time. There's a lot we could say about it, and there's many species, and there are sages around the world. So there's so much cultural connection between humans and sage species. And so many stories about our life and culture have been tied to this plant. And being so widespread with so many species around the world, it also has a lot of ecological and biological importance. The species that we might commonly find are listed here. Artemisia tridentata is this one here, which you see kind of covering the foreground. It's one of the most widespread species in the American West. Here we have the Artemisia frigida, the fringed sage or prairie sage, which is a little bit of a smaller species. This one's in my garden, but I like this one too. And then here's the Artemisia filifolia, which is a woody shrub that you'll find in sandy areas like the West Mesa and some foothill environments. It specifically likes really sandy soil. So it's more relegated to the Southwest, whereas these other species are more wide ranging across the Western and Plains states. And then, of course, there's many, many other species I'm not listing here that you can find in New Mexico and that you can find around other continents in the world as well. And it's leaves and flowers that we would harvest here. And internally, this is a very strong medicine. I would recommend only using very small amounts internally, but also can be made into infused oils and other topical preparations as well. This herb is associated with purification. It's very aromatic and dispersive, like the juniper and the snakeweed, like we talked about, but also it's very antimicrobial. And it's very moving to the urinary system, and it's also bitter, so stimulating to the digestive system. So it's stimulating a lot of these systems of elimination that are going to remove toxins from the body, and also being antimicrobial. Toxins circulating around the body and microbial infections, even low-level ones, are both two very common sources of inflammation, especially chronic inflammation. And so sage has a long history of use in treating bodily aches and pains like arthritis and other chronic inflammatory conditions and microbial infections. It's been used in wound care. It's also used for opening up the respiration and decongesting the respiratory system. It's considered a really important herb for respiratory protection and tonification during the dry, cold times in the high desert environment. And so it's associated with all of these kinds of healing practices. And a very important herbal medicine, another one that has a lot of ethnobotanical documentation, as well as a fair amount of scientific research behind it. And then I'm just going to take a look over here at the chat. Lorraine asks, is desert willow a legume? No, it is not. The pea family is a separate family. A desert willow is in the catalpa family, so it is not related to pea family plants, which are in the Fabaceae family. Thanks for the sweet compliments that are coming up. And then Eve says, yes, it's nice to hear about the plants we can all find. You are welcome. I'm so happy people want to have these conversations. It'll be so boring here by myself. I mean, I like Erin, but it'd be boring if you guys weren't here. And then Yasmin asks, could you talk about sage and plants called wormwood? Yes. So I want to specify too that I'm talking about Artemisias. You have that genus name on the screen, but we also use the word sage to talk about a whole nother plant family and genus, which is the salvia plants. And they're in the mint family. So different plant family. So sage, common names can be confusing. So I am not talking about salvias, which would include that culinary sage that you might have in your spice rack. So that's a whole different thing. So just to clarify that. And then Yasmin points out that there's plants called wormwood. So sage has a lot of common names, including wormwood. That is especially associated with the old world sages, the origins of absinthe, came from the old world and was considered a wormwood drink. And also some of the stories about sage that are in reference to biblical literature, oftentimes called wormwood. And some people also call the Western species wormwood. So I think that's kind of a generalized common name that might refer to many different species, just like the word sage. And that's why I do like to use botanical names and at least introduce them to people, because it can help us clarify what we're talking about. A lot of times, the medicinal properties of plants might apply to the whole genus, and all of the species could be used interchangeably. That's not always the case. In the case of sage, these are mostly used interchangeably, but this one, Artemisia filifolia, is a little distinct from the other species that we're talking about, because this one lacks a particular constituent called thujone. And so that does differentiate it a little bit phytochemically and medicinally from the others. So botanical names can be really useful in that way. I realize they're intimidating. And so, I try to use common names and botanical names to kind of cover, to cover it all. And then, so Yasmin, if you have follow-up questions, I don't know whether I actually answered your question or not, but feel free to post follow-up questions. And then Cecilia asks, is rosemary related to sage? Rosemary is related to the salvia sage, that culinary sage that's in the mint family. It's not related to these artemisias. So good question. All right, I'm going to move along because I feel like we're running out of time, and I definitely want to talk about globe mallow. I love this plant a lot. This is one of my favorites too. It was one of the first incredible dryland plants that just ensnared my heart. I can still remember the day when I first really laid eyes on it in a way that I paid attention to it. It was in this dusty, kind of dirty, insignificant landscape, like on the side of a parking area, on the side of the road. And it was just, like this picture is showing you this incredible bright blue sky with these incredible bright orange blossoms, and they're very small. And I was so entranced by them. I couldn't look away. And it was like that love at first sight feeling that changes you forever, and I've never forgotten that first feeling of absolute love and adoration and enchantment. And this plant became the symbol for my business. It's just, for me, I have so much gratitude for this plant that invited me into this botanical wonderland that I live in. And it's also one of my most used apothecary herbs. And that's another one I love talking about and teaching about because it grows in a wide variety of habitat types. You'll see it in the bosque, the mesa, the foothills. You'll see it in dry, open mountain meadows. There's many species of it. That's why I put Sphaeralsia with not a specific species designated. Most of the Sphaeralsia species are really concentrated in the Southwest because it likes hot, dry soil conditions. Mm-hmm. Someone is not muted, so I'm going to go ahead and try and make sure everyone is muted there. But back to globe mallow. This is a plant that grows in a variety of habitat types, so you'll find it wide ranging. Most of them are in the Southwest, though we do have a Sphaeralsia coccinea species, which is a kind of a shorter, more mounding, small shrubby type plant, whereas many of the others are tall and leggy in their structure. That Sphaeralsia coccinea species is more wide ranging and grows across the Western states and plain states. And so that was the best one to work with for wild harvesting because it has this large range and wide acceptance of different habitat types. Why do I love this plant so much? Aside from being incredibly beautiful and having this personal relationship, I think of this as, quite possibly the medicine of our times. If there was one plant I would associate with right now for healing the land and healing us, it's globe mallow. Globe mallow will colonize all kinds of areas that we've destroyed and disturbed. It will colonize all kinds of wild habitats just doing their own thing still. And it's a plant that is stable and doesn't mind the kinds of changes that we're creating and is proliferating despite that. And so it's a plant that I feel is going to move with us into the future and still be present. When I'm teaching now, I'm really teaching for the future. I am teaching people about plants that I think will be with us 100, 200 years from now. And to not put pressure on these plants that I'm not sure they're going to be coming along with us into that long distant future. So globe mallow is one that, really is still spreading across the land as we see environmental inflammation occurring, difficult changes, rapid changes occurring in our environment. Globe mallow continues to spread in the landscape to hold that soil down, to create habitat, to offer food and medicine to animals and to us. despite all of those changes. Same thing in our bodies. As our bodies become more inflamed because we are connected with this natural environment, environmental inflammation is our bodily inflammation. There is no separating human health and land health. Those things are deeply intertwined, and globe mallow reminds us of that story of interconnection. And as we see a lot of environmental inflammation occurring, we're having a lot of rise in chronic inflammatory conditions. For me, I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that's interconnected. And globe mallow is one of the great anti-inflammatory herbs. It balances the immune system. We've talked about herbs as balancers in the land and balancers in our body. Globe mallow helps to rebalance the immune system. If you have an over-responsive immune system, you have a chronic inflammatory condition of some sort, your body's responding all the time and creating an inflammatory response, globe mallow can help calm that down and take the rough edges away. Likewise, if you're someone who gets sick frequently and you can't seem to really get over your illness in a timely manner, and then you get sick again, globe mallow can help to more efficiently and effectively coordinate all the complex aspects of your immune system for a more efficient, effective immune response. So it's an herb that I would add to someone's formula when they're plateauing and they're healing. It's one of my go-to herbs for people who live with chronic inflammatory conditions. It's safe and effective for long-term daily use and helping to rebalance the immune response. Likewise, it's very healing to soft tissue inside and outside the body. It's got a lot of mucilage, so it's cooling and moistening to hot inflamed tissues. So think about rashes and bites and stings or chronic skin inflammations like eczema and psoriasis, like we mentioned with Juniper. Think about all the soft tissue inside your body. If you have like too much stomach acid or acid reflux, or you have maybe chronic digestive erosions occurring, this cooling and moistening to those soft tissues internally is also really helpful. I harvest mostly leaves and flowers for these purposes, though, you know, sometimes I find large stands, or I have a ton of it on my own property, and I'll harvest roots in situations where it's really abundant, or if I'm weeding it out of my yard. And the roots are also medicinal, and you can use those as well, though I really caution about harvesting roots from wild places because you're taking the entire plant's life in that case. So you want to take that very seriously. That's the last plant I had. I really thank everyone for being here with me today and listening to all of this botanical banter. And if you would like to take more classes with me, you can find me at albuquerqueherbalism.com. We have a new herbal semester beginning on August 24th, where you can join us for a semester of herbal talk and field trips and medicine making. And if you'd like to join me and the community doing native medicinal plant restoration work, or some of the free programs we offer, or if you're a school educator and want to get involved in our free programs, you can find me at yerbamonsterproject.org. And of course, all of the plants that we talked about today are in my book, The Ecology of Herbal Medicine, and I go into lengthy detail telling personal stories, providing scientific literature reviews, and everything in between. So I hope you'll check out my book, The Ecology of Herbal Medicine. And thank you so much, Erin, and Ciudad Soil and Water Conservation District, and to all of you for being here today. And if there's any additional questions, feel free to just unmute yourself, Erin, if we have a few more minutes. I know it's 11 o'clock, but.
I think that's fine. Thank you again, Dara. Your passion is just we feel it. It's really empowering for us as a community, and it's just really valuable to have people like you who are sharing this information, to help us all feel more connected to our landscape. So I really appreciate that. I did see a question that was just about the glow mallow from Yasmin. I thought maybe you could answer that. And for those of you that are still with us, thank you for being here. I will share this recording out probably on Facebook and our website. And I hope you join us for future talks, 10 a.m. on Wednesdays at the same Zoom link.
This has been a great series already. I can't wait to hear the other speakers. And just to answer Yasmin's question, for using globe mallow for the immune system, globe mallow extracts really well into water. And so everything I do with globe mallow starts with water. So, you can drink it as a tea. It is covered in tiny hairs, which some people are bothered by. I don't mind it. I could just rub that all over me and be fine. But some people could be bothered by those little hairs. So I usually recommend straining the tea through a little cloth to capture those hairs for people who are sensitive to them. And then also, you can make a tincture out of that. Don't have time to go into all the details about it, but I think you, Yasmin, already have a good herbal foundation. So I will just say that what I do to make that tincture is I make a double strength cold infusion of globe mallow, and then I strain that out and I use that liquid to make a tincture. I measure however many ounces I have of that, and then I take 190 proof alcohol, which is what I use for my tincturing, and I add 25% of that to the tea that I have, so that the final solution is 75% double strength tea and then 25% 190 proof alcohol. That's the minimum amount of alcohol to make that tea shelf stable so you can store it as a tincture in your cabinet and it won't go bad. And then that's how I make the tincture, because it's so water extractable. I extract it into water and then basically just preserve that. And then to use it to control or to manage chronic inflammation, it's important to remember that, you have to keep taking it. So I would recommend in that case, people taking it every morning and every evening as part of their self-care rituals, and doing that every day over the long term. And that provides really good results over time. And it's important to remember when you're trying to change a systemic imbalance like that, to give it time. I usually recommend that people go for it at least 2 to 3 months before they reassess their symptoms and say, have I moved? Have I improved on my symptoms over 2 to 3 months? Usually then you start to feel those results, because it takes a while, to stop a barreling train from moving forward. You got to slow that negative momentum down and turn it around and gain momentum in another direction. So that's basically how I use globe mallow for chronic inflammatory conditions. And, I make a little formula. It's a general formula that I'll share with you all here today. It's been, like, I would say probably my most popular herbal formula of all time. And I, want people to make these things for themselves. So I use globe mallow, oats, nettles, and licorice as the formula. Now, licorice does have a lot of contraindications. It's not safe for everybody. We didn't talk about it today, and it's beyond the scope of our discussion today. So if you do choose to use licorice, really do your research on that. It's not appropriate for people with high blood pressure, for example, which is a common contraindication. So that's my little short answer to a complex question. All right. Anything else we need to do today, Erin?
I don't think so. I think it's been a really wonderful presentation, and I hope folks, are inspired to go out and just look at some plants, touch some plants, smell some plants, see what's out there, and start to, notice how incredible they are. The more I learn about them, I'm just, I've been really inspired by all the information coming out about tree communication and intelligence in trees, and I'm just like, wow, plant world, it's got me hooked. Well, I appreciate your time so much. It's been a pleasure working with you, and we hope to have you back another time soon.
Absolutely.
Other than that, we will be in touch, and thank you to everyone again who joined us, and hopefully we'll see you again.